Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all. My name is Robert Baer. I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Spiritual Awakenings International. I recognize several familiar faces in our gallery, and just want to thank those that we got somebody here from Tasmania, the Philippines, Ireland, the UK, lots of UK folks, Singapore, Scotland, all across the United States and Canada, Puerto Rico, and Colombia. Welcome, everybody. We have a great event presentation on tap next. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Judith Miller, who is just a great person and a former advisory board director for Spiritual Awakenings International. Judith is a psychotherapist, a guide and consultant for psycho-spiritual development and consciousness evolution. She has trained and been all over the United States, Europe, and most recently China. She's a faculty member of Columbia University and also of the International Institute of Exploration of Consciousness and Psychotherapy in Germany. And just want to thank you, Judith. Take it away. Hope everybody enjoys the presentation, and we'll be back for a question and answer period a little later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. And thank you, everyone, for coming to my presentation today. The theme is living a sacred life in times of challenge. So I'll start by saying how today around much of the world, there is a huge focus on spirituality. Some even refer to it as a spiritual revolution. Even in China, where I've worked for the last 10 years, and there is a governmental suppression of anything spiritual, there increasingly is a growing subculture there that yearns for anything that is esoteric or religious. Why then, if spirituality is at an all-time high, is this also a time when individual and collective suffering, division, and despair seem to be stronger than ever? Instead of a one world consciousness, which is a term that many spiritual devotees use, we have huge splits, not only between different countries and groups of people, but also within the US. As another example, there are huge divisions now and divisiveness, which seem to be stronger than ever, not only between races, but among differing generations and between liberal and conservative political ideologies. We've had in the US mass shootings in schools, in places of worships, in city and rural neighborhoods, which have caused Americans to feel fear and despair. Suicides are way up. There is a severe worldwide mental health crisis, and research studies have shown that narcissism is at an all-time high. The woke culture and social justice movement in the US has led to what is referred to as the cancel culture, where people are afraid to discuss their beliefs or dialogue with each other anymore. Universities in the US have become places where instead of intellectual debates and dialogue, professors are cautious about what they say for fear of having students report to the administration for offensive comments regarding particular ideologies that may be in vogue. The environment and ecology is in extreme distress. So divisions, splits, and opposing worldviews have pitted people against each other and have broken up marriages, families, destroyed careers, and long-term friendships. Sincere and serious spiritual seekers are suffering like never before, with a prevailing sense of personal powerlessness. What is really happening and why? Some of you may take prophecies seriously, others may not. But it should be noted that there have been numerous prophecies and predictions throughout human history, which have foretold these current times as being catastrophic. Over 2,000 years ago, for example, Buddhist texts predicted that current times would be referred to as dark dharma. The Bible refers to final days. The 16th century French prophet Nostradamus foretold calamitous worldwide events occurring about now. The Hindus have stated that we are in the Kali Yuga age, when the world is very close to final destruction. At the same time, the Aztec culture prophesied that the recent birth of a white bull would bring about a transformed and harmonious 21st century. And many contemporary spiritual healers and practitioners also see the worldwide upheaval as leading to a new age of unity and peace. No matter one's belief and whether present times are perceived as hopeful or hopeless, most will agree that chaos and turmoil currently abound. In his classic work, A Study of History, Arnold Toynbee wrote one of the major works of historical scholarship published in the 20th century. The first volume was published in London in 1934, and subsequent volumes appeared periodically until the 12th and final volume was published in London in 1961. The work was to analyze the genesis, growth, and fall of every human civilization ever known. One of the main conclusions that his research demonstrated was that those civilizations which progress have a strong spiritual tradition and relationship to the divine, no matter what they call this divine or how exactly they conceptualize it. Additionally, data from sociological and cross-cultural research tell us that at an individual level, erosion of a strong cultural and spiritual identity leads to a self-image that loses its definition and becomes fragile. What Toynbee's research and what the sociological data demonstrate is that both collective and individual levels, there is a decline when spirituality is diminished or not present. But as we know, and as I already mentioned, we are living in times where spirituality is considered to be at an all-time high. So what is wrong? I believe that the spiritual revolution particularly in the West, is not doing its task as well as it should. So this presentation will focus on what I believe is necessary if we are to live a sacred life during these current times. The first area which I see lacking has to do with spiritual seekers not engaging in deep personal inner exploration and what Carl Jung called shadow work. Doing such spiritual activities, such as going to some yoga workshops and or reading some spiritual books, is not nearly enough. People must be committed to what I call their own psycho-spiritual processes, which necessitates having ego deaths. Without ego deaths, there is no real growth or authentic spiritual development. And ego deaths, as many of you know, are very uncomfortable and can often feel like actual physical death. So it is not surprising that many spiritual seekers will avoid ego deaths at any cost. The second area that I believe is necessary for seekers has to do with investigating, exploring, perhaps revisiting, and following your own spiritual and sacred roots. What this means is that if you were born into a particular religious tradition, that you need to open to and reconnect with the mystical and sacred foundation that underlies your own spiritual tradition. Even when you have criticisms of your own particular childhood religion, which many of us do, I believe that you need to revisit it, but in a new and transformed way. Because every religion and spiritual tradition was formed from a deep and meaningful mystical ground. And I believe this ground is buried in your soul. Turning away from it because you disapprove of the mistakes and hypocrisies of your childhood church or synagogue is a way that I believe many seekers get stuck and don't progress on their paths. Because mainstream religion, after all, is not much more than imperfect people trying to gain power in imperfect institutions. And this has nothing to do with the sacred ground and mystical experiences that each tradition evolved from. So we will discuss this more later. Now I will go back to my first concern. I will now discuss why it is so important to go through your own ego deaths when you are traveling a spiritual path. And when you do this, you will by necessity open yourself to the meaning and nature of physical death, which is also equally important. To approach the topic of the ego, an exploration of what we call our identity is needed. We deeply believe that we are what we see, the body, the mind, the emotions. Since our childhood, the family and society have taught us that our identity is our age, ethnicity, race, body image, gender, and socioeconomic position. These data are usually not questioned. It is only when we engage in deep inner psycho-spiritual work, like holotropic breath work, for example, which I have practiced with people around the world for the last 25 years, or a regular practice of meditation, for example, that we are led to question the reality of such beliefs. Also, after a life crisis or trauma, or during times of special intensity, we may become confused by what we think ourselves to be. I have observed in the last few years, since the stressors of COVID, the question of who am I becomes acute. Until we know the answer to this question, death will remain an anxious problem. The belief that we are an I, this body, this object that we can observe, causes an instinctive fear of disappearance. A feeling of insecurity is present and pushes us to constantly look for situations which release our anxiety. But can real security be found? Only when either the body dies and or the ego dissolves can you experience real security. Most spiritual paths suggest that the ego is the source of our suffering. The ego is considered an obstacle to the development of a truly free and liberated way of being. In summary, many say the ego is bad and egolessness is good. Consequently, many spiritual paths are structured around the eradication of egoism and the cultivation of egolessness. According to other spiritual teachers, the ego or self does not need to die because it was never really there in the first place. The only thing that is true reality is the awareness that we are born into this world from a place of oneness. And when we die, we go back to this place of oneness. And this oneness is the reality that reflects our existence and human nature. And at this foundation of human nature, there is a primary yearning to recreate our original merging with fellow humans and all creatures and with the higher power, what I call God. There is no ego in this yearning. It is only here in this space of oneness that you may experience wisdom and know God. There are many people today who claim to be spiritual, but there is no higher power or divine in their lives. I don't believe you can live a sacred life which is absent of God. At the same time, I recognize that at different periods of life, the ego self is necessary, given the nature of human beings. A person with an uncertain sense of self or ego can be very emotionally troubled. And as we rely on our ego or self to get through life, the ego is seen as solid, trustworthy, and reliable. But on the spiritual path, or by living a sacred life, the ego is seen as an obstacle to real knowledge. It constricts consciousness around itself. It creates separation and competitiveness and division with others, and prevents us from dissolving in the sea of global awareness, of oneness, of cosmic consciousness. The habit of ego is extremely strong enough to block the experience of ego dissolution for almost everybody. The strength of ego lies in the need that we have to relate to the world from the position of the separate self. And when the focus is on a separate self, there is no place for the divine. The ego is continually reinforced by every thought and experience through which the world is interpreted. Our fundamental insecurity, which requires us to construct the ego in the first place, supports it by our desires, aversions, and attachments. Further, the continual reinforcing of the ego is an unconscious process. Most of the habit of ego lies in the unconscious, out of reach of our conscious intention. Indeed, most of our life we simply identify with the ego, react from it, but never actually notice it. Our contact with the world is contaminated by the ego and its need to interpret. A particular description of the ego, which I like very much and seems very relevant to these times, is righteousness of the intellect. People are so narcissistic these days that they no longer are interested in listening or even hearing another's ideas and beliefs if it doesn't exactly reflect their own. We must purify our perception. There is a famous saying in the tradition of the 18th Siddhas of India, which summarizes our human condition. It says, "We are dreaming with our eyes open. Have you ever considered your life to be like a dream? Events, relationships, circumstances come and go with a dream-like quality. Where do such mental commentaries, daydreams, fears, desires, and dissatisfactions come from?" The Yoga Siddhas and modern psychologists agree. From the subconscious mind, that place where all of our memories, habits, desires, and fears are stored. However, the Siddhas realized that what we are seeking, happiness, enlightenment, heaven, we already have within ourselves. We have in ourselves the God force. It lives within us, beyond us, and between us all. We have only to let go of the distractions arising from the subconscious. Holding on to happiness is like trying to grasp water. It slips through our fingers. As long as one continues to seek happiness in transitory external circumstances, which come and go like dreams, one is bound to be disappointed. Awakening from the dream is to never lose sight of the fundamental reality, the presence of God. What prevents us from the awakening? The ego. Now I will read you a Sufi story on life, love, and death. Once upon a time, there were two horses that pulled the same cart. They worked together for many years, pulling the cart of a peasant. Over the years, they often argued with each other, complaining that the other horse was not keeping to its side, or was going just a little too quickly, or just a little too slow. One day, one of the two horses suddenly died. The remaining horse was very upset about this. It realized that in all the time that they had worked together, it had not once told the other horse how much it valued its company and its faithful help in pulling the cart. Now the chance was gone forever. The horse also reflected on all the squabbles they had. It suddenly understood that it need not have taken offense as easily as it had, that it need not have borne as many grudges, that it could have been less arrogant. In short, it realized that it had wasted all the energy that had been available for friendship and kindness on unworthy and unnecessary thoughts and emotions. The horse was ashamed and resolved to lead a different life in the future. Whoever its new partner was going to be, things were going to be different. But time passed and the horse forgot. One day it caught itself in exactly the same kind of behavior that it had sworn never to engage in again. The horse could not understand why it had returned to its old ways. That evening in the stable, the horse decided to seek out the peasant's donkey, which had a reputation of wisdom among the animals. The donkey listened to the horse's story. Eventually, it replied, "It is good that you have noticed what has happened. If you truly want to change, this is possible, but it will for a long time cost you your peace of mind. Are you prepared to accept this?" The horse replied that it definitely did not want to return to its old ways. Anything was better than that. So the donkey continued, "There is one very simple and at the same time very hard thing that you have to do. Remember every day that one day, perhaps today, perhaps many years from now, you will die. Remember every day that the horse next to you will die. Remember every day that every other creature you will see will one day die. Remember that all animals alive today are part of a wave, which will soon break and be lost on the beach forever, to be followed by a new wave and another and another. No wave is permanent. The only thing that is permanent is the ocean." There were tears in the horse's eyes. The donkey continued, "Only if you remember death will you become strong-willed and alert enough not to postpone love. This is my advice to you, and in following it, perhaps one day you may come to know that which is deathless." According to Joseph Campbell, the world's great mythologist, he said, "The secret cause of all suffering is death itself, which is the prime condition of life. It cannot be denied if life is to be affirmed. The conquest of the fear of death is the recovery of life's joy. Despite all attempts to deny it, resist it, and change it, Our uneasiness with mortality is always humming in the shadows of our consciousness. Some people are stricken by the morbid fear of finite physicality and the eternal mystery that follows. Others fear the ego deaths that are encountered when facing loss or giving up control or not attaining their desires. The irony is that the only constant in life is change. We live in a perpetual cycle of small everyday deaths. We are masters of death, and at the same time, we are its biggest deniers. From the moment of birth, we experience death in all its forms, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, in dying urges, dying jobs and vocations, dying relationships, dying cells, dying fears, dying love, dying egos, and dying souls. And yet, coming to terms with the surest thing known to man eludes us. Thich Nhat Hanh says that studying death can help us build the capacity to live a more solid and calm life without fear. And Carl Jung said, those who fear death the most are the ones who fear life the most. Jung also said, it would be desirable to think of death as only a transition, as part of a life process whose extent and duration are beyond our knowledge. Spiritual teacher Ram Dass says that when we practice dying, we learn to identify less with ego and more with the soul. I'd like to ask you now to join me in a short meditation related to ego death. And this was written by Ram Dass. So I'd like you, wherever you are now, if you will, to please get comfortable in your chair, to close your eyes, take some deep breaths in and out, in and out. Now bring your awareness to focus on something in your life that is changing or ending or dying right now. Breathe gently as you consider whatever transition is most significant right now in your life. Note any feelings that arise: fear, excitement, resistance, anger, annoyance, or sadness. Every time your feelings get the better of you, become aware of your breathing. Meet your troubled and contracted feelings with your calm and expansive breath. Breathe, sigh, and stretch out on the river of change. Remember times when you have resisted change in the past. Regard how things turned out in the end. Maybe not how you thought they would or you wanted them to, but in the end, there you were, wiser, stronger, still alive. Celebrate the poignancy of death and the promise of rebirth. Smile, relax. Allow yourself to break open. Sit tall with dignity and patience, watching your breath rise and fall. rise, and fall. Pray for the courage to welcome this new change with openness and wisdom. Now, please open your eyes, come back into this group, come back into your life. And when the time is right, do what you have to do, but do it with grace, with hope, with a lighter touch, and with a softer heart. The Eastern spiritual traditions tell us that deep reflection on your own death will make a real change in the depths of your heart. I agree. So going through ego deaths and facing mortality is one way that I believe you can be more at peace during these troubling times. Because this is the only way that you realize that the external chaos is not our true identity. Now we will discuss what I believe is the second important factor for living a sacred life. The second factor has to do with the need to explore and follow your own spiritual and sacred roots. The well-recognized developmental theorist and psychologist Erik Erikson believed that human development is largely based on the quest for identity throughout the entire lifespan. In other words, he suggested that development and growth require people to acknowledge and fully accept who they are and where they come from. This means, according to Erikson, that people must come to terms with such influences as one's family of origin, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and appearance. And certainly today, this perception is followed by modern psychology and the culture in general. While Erikson's theory on identity formation was an important contribution to contemporary developmental psychology, the area of spiritual identity is conspicuously absent from his work. What I have come to believe through my work with many people in the West, and also from my own spiritual journey, is that a healthy connection to our own sacred roots is more important these days than ever before. My roots are Jewish, but when I started traveling my own spiritual path as a young adult, I must admit that I bypassed my Judeo-Christian roots. My first book, which is called Direct Connection, I wrote of all the different experiences I had in expanded states of consciousness. My shamanic experiences, my experiences with aliens, the symbolism I saw from the archetypes that Carl Jung told us were from the collective unconscious. I've also been working for the I Ching for many years and continue this practice today, which is grounded in Confucianism and Taoism. On my own spiritual journey and expanded states of consciousness, I've had images of Hindu gods and deities. I've also had many Buddhist experiences of emptiness, fullness, and the impersonal transcendent. And finally, I've had numerous mystical experiences which have included the persons of Jesus and Mary, and becoming one with Christ consciousness. Surprisingly, for me as a Jew, these Christian mystical experiences were very strong and very meaningful. And as it turned out, this Christian mystical path, what is often referred to as Gnosticism, became the most important and long-lasting part of my spiritual journey. Some of what I talk about today may not reflect your beliefs and faith. That's okay. Your path is your path and must be followed as you see fit. But I will share with you what speaks to me and to many of the thousands of people across the world who I have worked with in the last 25 years. What I wrote about in both my books, Direct Connection, and also my last one, which is called Healing the Western Soul, is how every sacred tradition leads people to the same place, to a place of merging and becoming one with a higher power, whatever you call it or how you conceptualize it. And once you become one with the source, what I call God, your heart expands, your fear diminishes, and love for all beings becomes who you are. I believe living such a life now, becoming one and in close relationship with God, and making God the central focus of life, is the only way that individuals and our world itself can live peaceful and sacred lives during the trials we are now all going through. As most of you know, many contemporary spiritual seekers in the West talk about being spiritual but not religious. When they are asked what being spiritual means to them, they often say it's widely different than going to the church they did as a child. Then when I follow up and ask them to tell me exactly what spirituality means to them now, not what it doesn't mean, they will often look to me in a confused way. Then finally, they might say something like, I am a good and kind person, or I love nature. How is it then that there is more rage towards others, more divisiveness, anxiety, sense of powerlessness, loss of faith, and depression than ever before? If we follow Erik Erikson's theory that development and growth only come when we form a strong identity, it becomes important that people do not turn away from their own spiritual identity and roots. Again, I am not talking about organized religion. I am referring to the deep sacred energies that live in your soul from the time you were born. For those who were born into the Judeo-Christian tradition, our tradition's sacred teachings tell us the importance of living out of your authentic self. And when you do this, you are able to contact that extreme point where your human nature touches the absolute. That extreme point is your soul, where your ground, your being, your identity is penetrated by the sacred. The words of Thomas More, well-known author and teacher of Western spirituality, are applicable. He said, many of us spend time and energy trying to be something that we are not. But this is a move against soul, because individuality rises out of the soul as water rises out of the depths of the earth. As I have already said, I acknowledge that many people in the West have had negative experiences with their childhood religion. It is widely understood that organized religion is lacking a lot, that it has a history of atrocities against humanity, and has been a big disappointment in guiding people to develop a personal relationship with God. But we must not forget that mainstream religion, as it is often practiced today, is just another imperfect institution run by imperfect people. When I speak of the importance of healing the Western soul in my book, I am not talking about organized religion. Rather, I am referring to people needing to make a direct connection with the divine that is alive within their soul, beyond themselves, and as an energy force holding all humanity together. When we bypass and or avoid a religious or spiritual yearning, experience, or feeling that comes to us, like an image of Jesus, for example, who happens to be coming to increasing numbers of people around the world, we are saying to the universe, no. Instead, we need to say yes and not try and control what our ego or our personality tells us to do based on previous personal experiences with organized religion. The Dalai Lama, for example, says, study your own tradition, much better, safer. And Jung wrote, what good is the wisdom of the Upanishads to us and the insights of Chinese yoga if we abandon our own foundations like outworn mistakes to settle thievishly on foreign shores like homeless pirates? In his book, Integral Christianity, The Spirit's Call to Evolve, Reverend Paul Smith writes, Christianity began in Palestine as a direct personal experience. It moved to Greece and became a philosophy. It moved to Italy and became an institution. It moved to Europe and became a culture. And it moved to America and became a business. We've left the direct and personal mystical experience long behind. By leaving this kind of experience long behind, we no longer understand that both our identity and our power to heal lies in staying connected to the primal energy of our Western spiritual source. Again, I never tell people which spiritual path to follow. Rather, I wish to make clear that those of us whose birth religion is rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition need to remain open to its deep mystical influences and its teachings. I believe that opening to our Judeo-Christian roots allows us to be nourished by the Western sacred and mystical ground. This ground is our birthright. It means to have a direct and personal relationship with a higher power. It also means to acknowledge and make choices between light and dark, between good and evil. And it means to practice unconditional love, humility, and forgiveness. These are actual innate forces and predispositions in us that evolve from the deep cultural, spiritual undercurrents in people's souls. Neither spiritual development nor spiritual identity are extraneous forces in the human condition. They are central. They are serious issues for mental and emotional health and well-being. As the Hasidic rabbi from the 18th century said, whose name was Zasya, he said, when I get to heaven, they will not ask me, why were you not Moses? Instead, they will ask, why were you not Zasya? The wisdom in Zasya's teachings is that we each have one main job to do in life, to become fully, wholly, and completely our true self. All spiritual paths and traditions ultimately lead to the same place, to a place of oneness, of connection when we realize that we are all one, connected to each other and to the absolute. But the path that we take to get there may vary, and these variables may be very relevant to our evolution. As Carl Jung said, once again, I'm quoting him, he said, we must follow whatever spiritual unfolding comes through our consciousness. I have witnessed how many people have mystical and spiritual experiences which they reject because they have a knee-jerk reaction against earlier negative experiences with their birth religion. But again, our soul opens us to our true sacred roots, not to a religious institution. The essence of both Judaism and Christianity is rooted in direct personal experience of God. This means a personal relationship and surrender to the transcendent other. It is the nature of surrender and giving up personal control to this almighty God that is particularly challenging for the Western seeker. Why? Because in the West, the individualistic ego is entrenched in the personality. Children are trained from a very young age to be individuals and encouraged to consider their own needs and desires first, and to make choices based on who they are and what they believe. We learn that there is a right and a wrong way of looking at things. This individualistic and dualistic mindset is very different from the collective mentality of the East. It is also different from an emphasis on the illusory nature of life and the practice of emptying the mind in Eastern meditative practice. In the East, the concept of personal choice has been traditionally subsumed for the needs of the group. Consequently, letting go of ego in the East is not so difficult as it is in the West. As I've already emphasized, we are trained from childhood to make choices. Therefore, our greatest challenge on the path is to let go of that sense that we need to be in control and instead allow God to flow into our lives. Today, we are told that narcissism among people is the strongest it's ever been in human history. I'd like to end this presentation now by inviting you all, wherever you are, to join me in one more meditation that is based on Ken Wilber's work, referred to as the three faces of God. So if you will, please close your eyes again. Sit comfortably and become aware of your breath. Breathe deeply. Inhale. Exhale. Consider the term higher power, or consider the term God. Maybe you might think of this power as an omnipotent, huge, sacred force. A force that exists now, has always existed, and will always be. Breathe deeply into this feeling. God is beyond time and space, and it can be experienced in three basic ways. First, maybe you can experience the God within, the God self, the I am. It is how we as humans can experience the God force within ourselves. It lives in the soul, the deepest and most authentic part of who we are, the divine spark within. Breathe into this. Maybe you can now feel the second way to experience God as the other, the great transcendent thou, outside of and beyond me. It is the sacred other that the seeker must fully surrender to, pray to, and realize that this is the other who opens the possibility for the life we live. Breathe into this feeling. Maybe you can also experience God in the third way. To experience God through the all, feeling connected and merged with everything. No inner, no outer, the great web of life, the perfection of what's called oneness. It is the sacred energy that comes through all living things and binds us together. This deep sense of connection and oneness can be felt through the sparkle that we see in someone else's eyes, the unconditional love we might experience from our pets, the awe we can feel in nature, in a cathedral, through music and art. Experiencing God as the all is the connection that we have to ourselves, each other, and God itself. Now let yourself experience God in all three ways. God within, I am. God outside, beyond the self, with faith and trust you are never alone. And God the all, the sacred energy flows throughout us all. Be in these feelings, these experiences. Feel the silence. This is oneness. Let this God force flow through you, experience it beyond you and among us all. This is universal consciousness. This is reality itself. You are part of this. It is part of you. This oneness is you. You are never alone. When you are ready, please open your eyes and become part of our circle again. And I think the hour is up, and now it's time for questions and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Thank you for the great presentation. Thank you. I was going over the chat comments, and I picked out a few questions here for you. First one is from Anne. Dr. Miller, what is the most spiritually uplifting experience that you have had personally that has opened you to the sacred?
Oh my goodness. Oh, it's very hard for me to answer that honestly, because I mean, so many of them, when they occurred, seemed to me to be everything. And then I had another one, and that seemed to be everything. So I guess what I really believe is that this is not accidental. We're given what we need to have at the right time to help us progress on our journey. And so that's, I mean, I think that's as much as best I can answer it.
Can you share the story of your most powerful spiritually transformative experience?
Is that another question or the same?
Yes, it's a follow-up question.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, I mean, I as I said, that, each time I had my experience, I thought that was all there is. For example, when I was feeling the presence of aliens, and this happened to be in a breathwork process, and the alien and I became one, I experienced this oneness. And that felt to me like everything. I mean, it felt like everything. And then, like later in my journey, when I experienced the idea that the Christ consciousness was within me, that became extremely powerful. And as I said, this path of Christian mysticism and Gnosticism has been the path that I still travel today. And I guess I see the experiences of the alien and all the others as they all took me to the same place, which is that place of oneness with something much bigger than myself that was in myself. So, but this is where I've landed, and this is where I continue to be, because I think the world now needs Christ consciousness desperately. We need unconditional love. We need forgiveness. We need wisdom. And we need to be able to recognize that, yes, there are things that are happening that are dark, and that we need to make choices to go to the light. And so yes, you can say that this is a duality that many people like to say is not ultimate oneness. But I think as human beings, we need to go through those dualities to get to a place where we can hold everything as one. And this is an important step that I think many people overlook.
Since you touched on aliens, I know I wrote a question in the chat, and a couple other people commented that kind of piggybacked on it. My question was, you mentioned aliens in your presentation. Could you please explain your exposure, thoughts, and beliefs regarding aliens?
I don't know. I think they're true. I've worked with many people who, in expanded states, will experience these aliens in consciousness. I also spent a period of time earlier on where I would go to these conferences, these UFO conferences, where there would be an emphasis on actual physical contact, or seeing a UFO, or being abducted. I think just as in near-death experiences, people can be contacted in different ways through their consciousness or through an actual physical presence. But I think the meaning of it all is basically benevolent and positive, that whatever these higher dimensions are, they're trying to help move us along on our spiritual journeys to experience more expanded consciousness. So whether they have a negative experience, which they call an abduction, or whether it's an experience of positive light and merging, it takes us on our journey. And just like the near-death experiencers, most of them are talking about their positive NDEs. Some talk about their negative NDEs, but whether it's positive or negative, it's a trigger that is a catalyst for them working on their spiritual journey, which means revisiting their shadow, losing their ego, continuing to do the work. They can start negative and then ultimately move to the light. They can start positive and ultimately move to the shadow. But this is a necessity for all of these experiences, I believe.
Thank you. Santu made a comment when you were talking about the horses and the donkey.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, it sounds like a married couple. So
Yes.
thought it was a great comment.
Yes.
Brian has a question. What are the practical aspects of a person living with this current level of suffering? And how does the person tolerate this with more grace? And do we need to have big spiritual experiences to gain this perspective? 3 questions in one.
Okay, I think the kinds of spiritual experiences we have really are idiosyncratic, meaning that we get what we need so that we can move on, expand our consciousness. For me, I was kind of stubborn, and I had a lot of defenses and ego. So I had to be banged on the head, what I call the cosmic sledgehammer. So I had lots of big dramatic experiences. If I didn't have them, I would rationalize them away. Some people don't need that. Some people don't need that. All they have to do is have a quiet practice of prayer or meditation or awareness of who they are and what reality is about. And when they realize who they really are and that they're connected to higher consciousness and to God, and that's what really matters, then hopefully all the external suffering, you can kind of just see it and observe it and know that you're not it.
Thank you. Here's one from Corey. Question: can you say more about Integral as it impacts this topic? You mentioned Paul Smith's Integral Christianity book.
Yeah, well, you know, there is a field called integral psychology, integral spirituality. Ken Wilber is one of the people that, you know, he actually brought that name. It's the idea that everything is connected, and everything is connected. So a lot of Ken Wilber's work has to do with connecting all the different disciplines and finding ultimately that it's all one. And I mean, I think that this is the idea that we are not only part of each other and all connected, but we're also part of this God, this cosmic consciousness. We're all one. So that when something happens or when one of us reacts in a certain way, there's reverberations all over. And you know that as spiritual people, this is the illusion of separation that comes from that big ego is just not the truth. And so, you know, everything's breaking down because we haven't been really living that way, I believe.
Here's a question from Christina, and I'm glad she asked it because I had actually started one along the same lines and didn't get it finished. Her question, I would love to know more about your work in China and how this setting has added to your awareness and understanding.
Well, yeah, I've been in China for 10 years. And I haven't been the last few years because of all the COVID restrictions. But when I first went there, it seemed like such a foreign place. And I guess what I've really come to know and understand that I love the Chinese people, and I see that they have certainly different cultural and you know, orientations, family dynamics, but underneath it all, if there's one thing I've learned, is that we're all really the same. And what was really interesting for me to see, and I you know, one of the things I did there was a lot of the breath workshops, which was to expand people's consciousness, and people have, you know, all kinds of inner experiences in that process. It's a very powerful meditation. And many of them who may have identified with Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism and totally felt separate and didn't even have any understanding of Christianity were experiencing mystical experiences where suddenly, you know, Jesus came to them. And what was amazing to me is that when he came, their hearts opened and they started to cry. And it could have been alongside the Buddha as well that would come. But to me, that was sort of an affirmation that we need Christ consciousness and what it represents in this world today more than ever, because people who had no awareness or relationship, it was happening anyway to them. And also in Korea, where I've also been doing work, a similar kind of thing has been happening.
Thank you. We have time for at least one more question. This is from Ken. Can you talk more about fear, the role it's playing in the massive difficulties you cited in today's world, and the role of compassion in replacing fear with love, both for ourselves and others?
Yeah, I think fear is really running the show, so to speak. I think that you know, it started with COVID, and there was the fear of death that came up so much. And then there was the war in Ukraine and Russia. And, you know, speaking to people in Europe, I mean, there's a huge fear that there's going to be another war in their land. World War III. It's like it almost doesn't stop. You know, is if we think we're getting through one area, like another one comes. And I don't know, I guess that's why for me personally, I feel that we are living in a time where whatever shadow has been repressed and under the surface is now exploding. It's exploding in the individual, it's exploding in relationships, it's exploding in institutions and the collective. And, you know, as I think about the process, I think Well, this is really development when you think about it, because if things are repressed and pushed down, there's no way to deal with them. They're exploding. We have to deal with them. And for me, that gives me some hope. It may not be in my lifetime that I see things turning around, but I'm hopeful that ultimately, if all this can come up, I don't know what it's going to look like, how long, but it feels to me that this is one of the most sacred times that I've ever been alive in my life. Because to me, it's almost like God is walking on the earth, tapping things that are not the way they should be, and they explode. And, you know, that's why we have the mental health crisis that we are, and people suffering. And so to me, there's only one way to get through it. And that's what I was talking about today.
I'm going to make this the last question, and this person wrote two questions, and I'll kind of just consolidate them. To what extent does the electroconnectivity amplify or diminish the waves of fear? And is there a justice component in the spiritual awakening process?
Well, the first question, I don't think I know how to answer that. The second question, in terms of justice, I mean, I believe that this is all benign and good. I think everything is good, and ultimately for the growth and development and evolution, even if we don't understand it, what's going on in the moment. And so I trust it. And I think I really think trust is such an important thing now. When all seems to be falling apart, you've got to trust in what you feel in your heart and your soul.
On behalf of Spiritual Awakenings International, Dr. Miller, I'd like to thank you. It was a great presentation. The Q&A was outstanding. And on behalf of SAI, again, I'd like to acknowledge your work you did with us on the SAI advisory board. And we appreciate all the efforts you've put in to our organization since its inception. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. And any final comment, Dr. Miller?
Well, it was really wonderful to be with you all. I mean, we're in little boxes, but I can feel the energy and I can feel your hearts. And, you know, I send you my heart to your heart. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.